This article about a very controversial competition, the 1973 IFBB Mr. International contest, comes from the January 1974 issue of Muscle Builder and Power magazine. The title of the article is called "Let Me Tell You a Dirty Story," written by Joe Weider. It says that the 1973 IFBB Mr. International contest, Sergio Oliva tried to pull off another dirty trick, but it didn't work. A great invasion of bodybuilders gathered in Tijuana, Mexico on August 12th for the annual Mr. International. A large contingent of competitors came from the Southern California area and others from as far away as Belgium and Czechoslovakia. The contest was held at the Palacio Azteca in downtown Tijuana. Once again, Mexico's bodybuilding impresario, Eddie Sylvester, staged an outstanding show. The trophies were really unusual, of Aztec design and made of gold-plated bronze mounted on marble. The biggest surprise turned out to be when Sergio Oliva showed up and entered the contest. It was puzzling to see one of the real superstars entering a competition of approximately a Mr. America caliber after years of competition against the world's greatest. But before the day was over, it was clear that Sergio had more than winning Mr. International on his mind. In addition to the featured contest, several other titles were also contested. The Mr. Mexico was won by Luis Perez. The professional Mr. Mexico went to Roberto Tolos. The Mr. Latin America title was annexed by John Maldonado, with Carlos Rodriguez second and Luis Perez third. The Mr. International contest lived up to its name, as Pierre Vandenstein came all the way from Belgium, and he looked sensational. He won the highly coveted World's Best Abdominals Award, and he definitely deserved it. He also easily won Most Muscular Man and Best Back. What tremendously deep chisel definition he possesses. Pierre won the short man's class by beating an impressive John Maldonado, who was second, and Carlos Rodriguez third. Franklin Jones, a former third-place winner in the AAU Mr. America, was fourth. The medium class was dominated by Sergio. He was far and away ahead of his rivals. Sergio said he weighed only 218 pounds, which would be the lightest he has been in years. He was adjudged the overall Mr. International winner, but this was later changed, and Pierre Vandenstein was declared the winner. I'll explain that later on. Sergio declined to accept the height class first place trophy, so it went to first runner-up Bob Birdsong. Improving with every contest, Birdsong won best legs, and he was very close in every other subdivision. Bill Grant looked terrific and copped the second place trophy, also winning best arms. The third place trophy went to an impressive Kent Keene of Orlando, Florida. The tall man's class winner was popular David Dupree. He was tremendous. He has tremendous arms and a fine upper body. He also won best chest. Second place in this class was somewhat of a surprise, as 40-year-old Bill Howard came out of retirement looking more muscular than ever and displayed a carbon copy of Vince Gironda's famous posing routine. Charlie Fouts won third place, but didn't appear to be in his best shape. With 4 weeks to go before the big shows in New York, Charlie should be at his best and give a great account of himself, as he always does. The contests were well covered, with photographers Artie Zeller and Russ Warner on hand to capture the event on film. There was also a banquet held for all the contestants and officials, which cost the host, Eddie Sylvester, $1,500. All profits from the show were turned over to charity. Sergio causes controversy. Now let me tell you the dirty story. The unexpected appearance of Sergio Oliva proved to be extremely popular with the audience. The competition was very close in all divisions, except that Sergio was easily the best man in the contest. Sergio declined to accept either the height class award or any subdivisions. He was only interested in the overall title. The Mr. International Azteca was open to all former Mr. International winners, but Sergio was the only contestant. Capitalizing on his popularity in Mexico among fellow Latins, Sergio challenged Arnold Schwarzenegger to a contest to see who was the best-built man in the world. This was done despite the fact that Arnold has beaten him 3 times in a row, and despite the fact that Sergio knew he could go to New York and compete against Arnold in the Mr. Olympia in less than a month. Using his usual tactics, Sergio decided to kick up a theatrical farce and issued his challenge to Arnold by trying to put him on the spot, even though Arnold had told him before the contest that he was looking forward to the Mr. Olympia, when all the challengers would be there to officially battle it out for bodybuilding's greatest award. Naturally, Arnold, being a great competitor, he wanted to compete. He asked whether he should accept the challenge. I said that he shouldn't. I then went to the microphone and I explained to the audience that Sergio was up to one of his old tricks again, and that it was impossible for Arnold to compete because he was already committed to the Mr. Olympia contest in New York, where the world's best built man would be officially decided. I also explained that if Sergio really wanted to compete against Arnold, that he should go to New York and compete in the Mr. Olympia contest. Sergio wouldn't go for this idea, and he kept demanding a contest to be held instantly. I tried to explain to Sergio and to the audience that people in New York had already spent thousands of dollars on advance tickets, many of them young bodybuilders who had saved up their money in a long time, to see the battle of the century between Arnold, Sergio, Nubre, Katz, Franco, and others. It would not only be ridiculous, but it would also be highly unfair to all those fans in New York to have to issue already decided beforehand. This is totally illogical. It is comparable to people buying ringside seats for a world heavyweight boxing match at Madison Square Garden to see the champ and the top contender. But then the boxers decide to fight it out in Puerto Rico a month before the match at the Garden. The whole idea was totally nonsensical, but Sergio would not accept no for an answer. He went out into the audience and pleaded with them in Spanish and English to back him up. I had no choice but one, and that was to tell Arnold not to compete. Arnold, being a good pupil, took my advice and did not enter. If he had entered, there's no doubt in my mind he would have wiped out Sergio completely. But I had the people in New York to consider. Tom Miniacello had spent thousands of dollars organizing and preparing the Mr. World and the Mr. Olympia events. Contestants were coming in from all over the world to vie for the titles. So to protect the best interest of everyone concerned, the fans, the other contestants, and the sponsors, I advised Arnold to decline Sergio's challenge. Sergio continued to rant and rave until Franco Columbu came out of the audience to accept the challenge. Although not in his best shape because he still had 27 days of muscularizing and polishing before the Mr. Olympia, Franco gave a terrific posing display. Sergio then went through a rather brief routine. There actually was no official decision, and as you can see from the photo of the contest, Eddie Sylvester raised both men's hands overhead, which usually means a draw. However, it's important to point out that Sergio somehow got the title of Mr. International Azteca. This was ruled out by the IFBB when it was learned that Sergio had entered the Mr. Galaxy contest, which was sponsored by the World Bodybuilding Guild a few days before, making him ineligible to compete in any IFBB show. It isn't exactly clear how Sergio got the first place trophy. Perhaps he just walked over and picked it up on his own. The fact is that he does not have this title, and it was turned over to Franco Columbu as the only eligible entry. Another thing that should be mentioned is that it is very unsportsmanlike of Sergio to challenge others when he knew full well they were training for another show almost a month away. Sergio trained specifically to be at his best for this show, while Arnold and Franco had 4 weeks left of shaping up and cutting up to be at their contest best. However, since the so-called myth isn't the greatest in the world like he thinks he is, 3 straight losses to Arnold plus 1 to Bill Pearl, I think it's a good idea to explode the myth in our next issue. I will personally do an article on his muscular development in which I will present my view and analysis of why Sergio is not the unbeatable king of bodybuilders that he would like everyone to think he is, and why, in my opinion, that he will never beat Arnold. IFBB Mr. International results: short class under 5'6", first class Pierre Vandenstein, second John Maldonado, third Carlos Rodriguez, medium class under 5'10", Bob Birdsong first, Bill Grant second, Kent Keene third. Note, Sergio Oliva won the medium class but was later disqualified for not being an eligible IFBB member. Tall class over 5'10", first Dave Dupree, second Bill Howard, third Charles Fouts. Mr. International overall, Pierre Vandenstein. Subdivision winners: best chest, Dave Dupree; best arms, Bill Grant; best back, Pierre Vandenstein; best legs, Bob Birdsong; most muscular, Pierre Vandenstein; world's best abdominals, Pierre Vandenstein; and the IFBB Mr. International Azteca was Franco Columbu. Very interesting article, very controversial contest. And this was the showdown in Tijuana, Mexico. And it's interesting that Sergio felt he would not get a fair shake at the Mr. Olympia because he felt Weider was stacking the judging panel with people that were going to pick Arnold as the winner. So that's why he went to Tijuana, and he wanted to compete in the Mr. International contest. And there he felt he would get a fair shake because it would be Latin American judges, judges from Mexico, and he felt that they would judge the contest fairly and he would have a better shot of beating Arnold than at the Mr. Olympia contest, where he felt Weider had the deck stacked against him. And reading this article, it's interesting that Joe Weider is calling out Sergio Oliva, and he said he's not the greatest, and you could really see that Sergio really was not favored by the IFBB at this point, even though he was a three-time Mr. Olympia winner. Another thing, Sergio only wanted to enter the IFBB Mr. International so he could have that title, and then he could enter this new title, which was called the IFBB Mr. International Azteca. The IFBB Mr. International Azteca was only open to former Mr. International winners. Arnold was a former winner of the Mr. International, as was Frank Zane, as was Franco Colombo. So that's why Sergio wanted to go into the Mr. International, even though it was below his competition standards. He was already a three-time Mr. Olympia. And as Joe said, these guys were more like the line of the Mr. America competitors. What Sergio really didn't want to take the title away from them. That's why he let them have the trophies. And then he just wanted the title so that he could go into this Mr. Azteca, International Azteca, and compete against Arnold. So that was the reason why he did it. And he challenged Arnold on stage, and then Arnold wanted to do it, as Joe said, but he refused to go up on stage. 3 weeks later, the Mr. Olympia was held in New York, and Sergio, of course, did not show up. In fact, I believe he competed in a WBBG contest on that same day. On September 8th, 1973, that the 1973 Mr. Olympia was held, Dan Laurie held his WBBG Pro Mr. World contest at Hunter College Auditorium, which was in New York, only blocks away from where the Mr. Olympia was being held. So he held it in direct competition with the Mr. Olympia, and he had Steve Reeves appear there as a guest. So that got all the attention. Sergio was at that contest instead of the Mr. Olympia, and he was a guest poser at the WBBG Pro Mr. World. So instead of going into the Mr. Olympia that night, Sergio was right there in New York, but he decided to guest pose at Dan Laurie's show instead of competing against Arnold. So a lot of drama going on at the 1973 Mr. International contest.